I always care. Thank you. Okay, 1 minute. Okay, it is 4 o'clock. I will call the August 17th Salina City Commission meeting to order. I would first ask staff for confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we will have roll call.
Mayor Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Franz.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges. Here. Commissioner Ryan.
Here. Thank you. Would those who are please able stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move into awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police presentation of Valor Awards to 3 Salina Police Department officers for their courageous actions on August 28, 2019, to be presented by Salina Police Chief Brad Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner, for allowing us to be here today to make these presentations. I'm very pleased to present these. We've done it a couple times in the past, and it usually means our officers have rose above the normal day-to-day that we do, and it's something just a really life-changing event, and I would say that these definitely are. Today, I'm pleased to present 4 Valor Awards received from the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police. These Valor Awards are the result of agencies nominating officers for their actions during a critical incident. The KACP Awards Committee evaluates each submission and selects recipients based on the award criteria and the significance of the nominee's influence on their community. Sergeant Chad McCary, Officer Carlos Londano, Officer Keenan Breen, and Officer Jesse Christmas. Could you please step forward, please? Thank you. These are 2 separate incidents that occurred in 2019 involving these 4 officers that stand before you today. On February 5th, 2019, a suspect reportedly armed with a handgun committed a carjacking on West Schilling Road. A responding officer observed the stolen vehicle shortly thereafter. A vehicle pursuit occurred for approximately for several minutes, both inside Salina and in the county. During this pursuit, the vehicle shot at pursuing officers and deputies several times, in fact, striking 2 Saline County deputy vehicles. Officer Jesse Christmas, who was still in the field training at the time, which if you think about that, he was in his first year of training when this occurred, was one of the officers pursuing the armed suspect. The suspect then drove his vehicle into a field in rural Saline County and exited his vehicle with a weapon in his hand. Officer Christmas and his field training officer exited their patrol vehicle and took cover behind a deputy's vehicle. Officer Christmas did not fire at the suspect as he immediately recognized the danger of a friendly fire incident involving a nearby deputy. Simultaneously, a deputy and a SPD sergeant fired their rifles and struck the suspect. For his actions on that day, Officer Jesse Christmas is awarded the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police Gold Award for Uncommon Valor. This Gold Award is an award recognizing uncommon valor in the line of duty. Sergeant Kyle Tonages, Officer Kevin Ray, and Officer Michael Baker previously were presented with Valor Awards for the same incident. If you're wondering why these are 2019 events, it's because each year in the preceding year is when we nominate folks and vote on them. So these are from 2019. The second incident occurred on August 28th of 2019. Several officers responded to a residence on Harold Avenue for a reported subject who may be injured. Officers observed what appeared to be blood on the front porch prior to entering the residence. Once inside, while clearing the home, officers located a deceased female in the main floor bathroom. It was blatantly obvious to all that her death was not natural. Officers, now knowing that there was a possible murder suspect in the home, continued to clear the residence. While clearing the residence of this home, they located a partially barricaded door. Within this room, they observed a male armed with a large knife. This male refused to drop the knife or exit the room. Sergeant McCary introduced pepper spray into the room in an effort to have the suspect surrender. And when I read that, it sounds different when I wrote it. When I say introduce, he sprayed it in there. Introduce is kind of a cop term. I apologize for that. But he sprayed pepper spray into the room. The suspect refused to surrender and suddenly opened the bedroom door with a knife still in his hand. Commands were given again to drop the knife to no avail. Sergeant McCary transitioned to his taser and deployed it, but it too had no effect on the suspect. The suspect then exited the room, still holding the knife, and advanced towards the officers. Officer Carlos Lundano and Officer Keenan Breen fired their handguns to stop the male's life-threatening actions. Unfortunately, the male later succumbed to his injuries. It was determined that this male had in fact stabbed the female to death prior to retreating to his downstairs bedroom. For their actions on that day, Sergeant Chad McCary, Officer Carlos Lundano, and Officer Keenan Breen are awarded the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police Gold Award for Uncommon Valor. It's important to note that both of these incidents were investigated by the Kansas Bureau of Investigations and reviewed by the Saline County Attorney. It was the opinion of the Saline County Attorney that all officers acted appropriately and performed their duties within the confines of the law. Well done, gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlemen, on behalf of the City of Salina, we thank you for your service, and those other officers that are out here, we are always grateful when something like that, you're all going home safely to your families. That's our number one goal, so thank you for your service. With that, we will move into Citizens Forum. This is an opportunity for individuals that would like to come forward and comment on something that is not on the current agenda. Again, please give your name and address, and you will have 5 minutes.
Deborah Corrales, 124 East Charlotte. I come here today to share some information regarding breed-specific legislation. These agencies that do not support breed-specific legislation, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Association of Professional Dog Trainers, Best Friends Animal Society, Humane Society of the United States, National Animal Control Association. The American Bar Association urges all states, territorial, and local legislative bodies and governmental agencies to adopt breed-neutral dangerous dog reckless owner laws. The American Kennel Club opposes any legislation that determines a dog to be dangerous based on a specific breed. The American Veterinarian Medical Association says dog bite statistics aren't really statistics, and they do not give an accurate picture of dogs that bite. Statistics on injuries and fatalities caused by dogs cannot be responsibly used to document the dangerousness of a particular breed. The American Veterinarian Society of Animal Behavior's position is that such legislation, BSL, is ineffective and can lead to a false sense of community safety, as well as concerns for dogs identified, often incorrectly, as belonging to specific breeds. There are also several insurance agents that do not discriminate against dogs by breed. The Center of Disease Control states that fatal dog attacks are extremely rare. In comparison, on average, each year, 100 people are killed by lightning, 54 by bug bites, excluding mosquitoes, 65 by being struck by a cow, and 150 by falling coconuts. They recommend against breed as a factor in dog bite prevention. They also recommend wearing masks in public areas, avoiding large gatherings, and social distancing. I find it ironic that we listen to and follow expert advice when it directly affects us, but dismiss it when it doesn't. The moral problem with breed-specific bans, be it bullies, Rotties, Dobermans, German Shepherds, or whatever happens to be the vicious dog of the month, equals canine racism.
Tyler Sartain, 233 North Kansas Avenue. Ditto to Deb, but also my concern is when we have like our advisory board meetings, not all of them are recorded, which kind of is concerning because we want to be transparent and we want to let the public know what goes on in those meetings. I'm not aware of any that are not recorded, but I know there was one that I believe which was a couple months ago for some subdeveloping things, but I think it would be wise if we record all meetings that we can, just so the public can know. And I would also like to know why we don't have term limits on the commission itself when we have term limits on these other boards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why we don't have what's on the boards? Just couldn't get that last word.
Term limits, because there's term limits on the advisory boards, but not on the city commission itself. And when I was quarantined for 2 weeks after testing positive for corona, I had a lot of time to like look at our state and city municipal code. And I was just wondering why we don't have term limits on y'all when we do have it on other boards, just to make it as fair as possible. So,
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gavin Jones. I'm a resident of Salina, and I just wanted to talk about some systemic issues that I think affect the community today. And one of those is, I think, the dichotomy of access and, I guess you could say, the dichotomy of wealth between different areas of the city. Specifically, if you look at things like North and South Salina, we can see that, for example, a large portion of Salina is considered a food desert. In that sense, a large portion of Salina residents, especially on the north end, do not have access to a grocery store with high-quality fresh produce within at least a 10-minute walk, or even less, or a bit more than that. And one of the biggest offenders in that case would be the north end of Salina, north of Iron Street especially. We can see that in that area of Salina, there's only really one grocery store, and that's the Save-A-Lot on Iron. However, many of the people that are north of that, they don't have necessarily the time or necessarily the access to walk or even drive all that way. And I think that it would be a good idea to consider implementing or putting in some kind of grocery store that has fresh food in that area of Salina, because it has major systemic effects. What we can see is that when people don't have access to high quality fresh food or some kind of grocery store in their area, then that leads to larger impacts. Areas without grocery stores that sell things like fresh produce have higher rates of poverty and are more likely to be targeted as places with high rates of crime. And this leads to greater rates of incarceration and greater targeting of people of color and people that are living in poverty, often which go together. So I'm here to just say that I think that there is a very large dichotomy, and a very important thing to address in Salina would be the creation of better access and options for the people living in areas of high poverty, especially in the north end of Salina. Another issue that kind of goes with this is just the overall lack of affordable housing initiatives in Salina. While there are affordable housing initiatives in Salina, and we applaud those initiatives for actually existing and helping people, there's often not enough. There's a problem with homelessness in Salina, and there's a problem with poverty in Salina, and that's clear that many of these people do not have access to good quality affordable housing, and there's simply not enough affordable housing to go around. This is something that is very important because without affordable housing, it means people are more likely to fall into a cycle of poverty, which leads to things like crime, incarceration, health problems. All of the problems that come with poverty are things that are addressed that can go back to things like affordable housing, access to food, and these are things that the community continues to struggle with. So I think it would be important to have more affordable housing initiatives in Salina in order to address these issues and in order to protect people that need it most, especially during the time of COVID-19. We're seeing that as government stimulus programs are continuing to be stalled, and as we move into more reopening, we can see that more people are going to be having to pay rent soon and could possibly face the issue of being evicted, even though there was a stopgap on that for a while when COVID-19 was first coming around and we could see the first large spike in the number of cases. However, now what we are going to see is more people that still don't have the resources, the money, or the ability to pay their rents, possibly could be leading to and will likely lead to a wave of evictions as the economy continues to reopen. So this all ties back together just into the issues of the lack of access and the lack of initiatives to address, and the lack of initiatives and budgetary funding to address things like the lack of affordable housing in Salina, the high rates of poverty, and the low rates of access to good quality food. All of these things can be tied back to high rates of poverty and larger rates of incarceration, especially among people of color. And if Salina truly wants to be a city that has a commitment to making life to giving everyone that lives here a good and fair life, then it's important that we start to address these issues. And one way that can be done is greater funding for these initiatives, greater funding through the budget, greater funding through things like the budget for these issues. I know that from looking over the budget previously that there's been decreases or at least stagnant funding for things like the community housing initiatives and other community initiatives, while other portions of the budget continue to increase. And I think there's important issues to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, with that, we will move to the consent agenda.
Hello. Santiago Vasquez. I live in Salina, Kansas. I come to address the City Commission as my last Monday as a person who has lived in Salina their entire life before I go to college. It's a new and exciting time. And first of all, I just wanted to thank the City Commission for their work and commitment to work on the Citizens Review Board as well as addressing the 1033 program. Those are two very important things that I think the city needs to look at in order to improve the quality of its policing and the security of its citizens. And I'm glad that I can leave knowing that the city is working on implementing those measures to ensure that there is a better future for the people who live here. However, seeing as these things are already being addressed, and honestly, all we can do is wait to see and make sure that those things go through. It's important that we start addressing other areas of concern in the community. And one thing that's always struck me as interesting is the way we process this information and the dialogue that we have around them. Particularly in the fact that we only ever look at reform when addressing these issues, when clearly the issues are much more systemic. Reform simply is never going to be enough. And the fact that we've had a lack of systemic dialogue forces us to repeat those same mistakes. When addressing poverty, when addressing homelessness, when addressing drug abuse, or addressing the incarceration rates, the people that are in jail, the fact that we need a larger jail, all these things come down to looking at why we have those problems in the first place. But it seems that our rhetoric only ever talks about how we can address those in a reactionary measure. Oh, our jail is currently failing. We need to create a new jail. But we never ask ourselves, why do we need a new jail in the first place? I know from just like learning more about the jail, the fact that that the population within the jail has increased, and asking those questions, it seems that a lot of people avoid asking why our jail population has been increasing, or why more people are being incarcerated, and instead just go down to believing that there's just more crime, when clearly that is too much of a simplification of the problem. Additionally, we see that with these higher rates of crime, it also justifies having more police, when clearly police are also a reactionary measure to problems within the community. Instead of asking ourselves how we can reduce the rates of crime and ensure that people have access to equitable resources that would lead to less incarceration, we instead ask ourselves, how can we have more police to police a problem instead of addressing that problem? And that sort of rhetoric obviously is incredibly detrimental to the future of Salina, because it's simply unsustainable. We can't expect ourselves to be finding more and more money to create new jails to add more officers when we're already understaffed. That's just an unsustainable paradigm. We need to be asking ourselves, what can we do with the budgets that we have now to ensure that in the future we don't have to keep bandaging all these wounds? And this just means that we have to rethink our systems that we have now. We need to rethink the police. I know that people have always had an aversion to things like defunding the police or even abolishing the police, and Salina has never made it to those lines of dialogue. But I think it's important to pull from those what we can do to reform the systems of police that are already in place, because clearly they're not doing enough. If crime is still going up, if we need a new jail, then we're not doing enough. In fact, we have empirical evidence that shows that the police were never ensured to protect the people in the first place. The police were created to protect the state, the government, the laws that currently exist. They were never meant as proactive measures to reduce crime. We can look at cases like Warren versus District of Columbia in 1981 that ruled that the police don't have a duty to protect the people. We can look at Castle Rock versus Gonzalez in 2005 that was also resolved in the Supreme Court. We can look in 2018 when a Florida federal judge threw out a case saying that the police had a duty to protect citizens of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School after the Parkland shooting. Over and over, our governmental bodies have reassured us that it is not the police's job to protect the people. And if that's true, then what is their job? And if it's true that police are a reactionary measure to problems that already exist, why do we spend so much time talking about what we need to do to help the police instead of what we can do to help the community? Because if that's truly their job, and if that's truly our job, then we should be looking at those measures in the first place. And I say this in security knowing that I won't be here for much longer, but I think that sort of dialogue needs to be reintroduced. And I don't mean to harass anyone in saying that, or to antagonize anyone in saying that, because I know everyone has a job that they've been put into, and that's important. But it's time that we start asking these questions.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone else? Okay, with that, we will move on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the special meeting minutes of August 6, 2020. And item 6.2, approve the regular meeting minutes of August 10th, 2020.
Okay, do we have any items a commissioner would like to remove from the consent agenda? If not, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda, items 6.1 and 6.2. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will move us into administration.
Item 7.1, second reading ordinance number 20-11036, levying special assessments against certain lots and pieces of property to pay the cost of abatement of nuisances.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Ordinance 20-11036 was passed on first reading on August 10th, levying special assessments for repairs and of abatements of nuisances. Since that report, the ordinance has been modified to show that there have been some payments made since first reading in the amount of $1,779.42. So attached to the report is the updated ordinance, which shows that we are levying an amount of $69,021.15 in special assessments. Action items recommended for the Commission today is to approve Ordinance 20-11036 on second reading, approve Ordinance 20-1106 as amended on second reading with additional amendments that you deem appropriate, postpone consideration of the ordinance, or vote to deny the ordinance on second reading, which would then require that the city absorb the cost of those assessments. Staff recommends option number 1.
Okay, do we have any questions for staff? Okay, do we have any public comment? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mr. Mayor, move approval of ordinance number 20-11036 as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11036 as amended on second reading. We'll have roll call.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Franz,
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges. Aye. Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
Aye. That passes 5-0. That will move us to 7.2.
Item 7.2, second reading ordinance number 20-11037, levying special assessments against certain lots and pieces of property to pay the cost of repair of sidewalks.
Thank you. This ordinance was passed on first reading on August 10th, and since that time, there were no comments and no additional payments received. So action items for you to consider are to approve ordinance 20-11037 on second reading, approve the ordinance on second reading with amendments as you deem appropriate, postpone the consideration of ordinance 20-11037 on second reading, or vote to deny ordinance number 20-11037 on second reading. Staff recommends option number 1.
Okay, any questions for staff? Any comments from the public? If not, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
Mr. Mayor, move approval of ordinance number 20-11037.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 20-11037 on second reading. We will have roll call.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Franz,
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges. Aye. Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Hoppick.
Aye. That also passes 5-0. That will now bring us to 7.3.
Item 7.3, adopt 2021 budget and related items. 7.3A, second reading ordinance number 20-11035, adopting and appropriating the 2021 annual budget. Item 7.3B, resolution number 20-7852, adopting the position, classification, and salary schedule for city employees for 2021. And 7.3C, resolution number 20-7853, adopting the 2021 comprehensive fee schedule for the city of Salina, Kansas.
Ms. Pack.
Thank you again. Ordinance 20-11035 was passed on first reading on August 10th, 2020, which adopted and appropriated the 2021 annual budget. Also included in this action is the approval of the 2021 position classification and salary schedule. It has been adjusted to reflect a 2% pay adjustment or cost of living increase effective January 4th, 2021 in accordance with City Commission direction obtained during the budget study sessions. This increase will cost approximately $640,000 in salary costs against all funds, of which about $500,000 would impact the general fund. The 2021 budget also includes a pay plan adjustment for street maintenance workers to increase the pay grade from grade G to grade J, to adjust the starting pay and current pay for some employees. Compression and minimum below new pay grade minimum also had to be effective on January 4th, 2021. Staff is in current discussion regarding an earlier implementation to this adjustment in anticipation of this winter snow plowing season, and also evaluating the effects on the 2020 budget that this may cause. Staff will return this action item to City Commission related to the 2020 effective date at a future meeting. The comprehensive fee schedule has been reviewed and has been proposed to be adjusted due to inflation and market price at an average of 2 to 3%. In some cases, there are larger increases or slight decreases to accommodate cost of service or market pricing considerations. These increases will also take effect on January 1st, 2021. The fee increase for animal service surrender fees and police reports, which include electronic photos that we discussed during earlier study sessions, has been put on hold and will be reviewed later and brought back separately if necessary. As we all know, fees for municipal court, parks, and recreation are not affected by this comprehensive fee schedule. Adjustments to the water and wastewater and golf course rates will be deferred until later when we have additional information about those funds. The 2021 annual budget provides the plan and authorization of resources for the operation of the city services and was formulated with the proposed salary and fee adjustments in mind. Today we have 3 action items. The first one is ordinance number 20-11035. You have 3 options to approve on second reading, ordinance 20-11035, adopting and appropriating the 2021 annual budget in order to meet the statutory certification deadline on August 25th. Postpone consideration of second reading of the ordinance to a future date and give staff additional information as far as what you'd like to see brought forth, or do not approve on second reading ordinance 20-11035, resulting in a budget violation to the city. For resolutions 20-7852, adopting the position classification and salary schedule, and resolution 20-7853, adopting the 2021 comprehensive fee schedule, we've identified 4 options. You can approve those resolutions, approve them with amendments as you see fit, postpone consideration for either of the resolutions, or choose not to approve the resolution, leaving the current fee and salary schedules in place at time. For all 3 action items, staff recommends option number 1.
Okay, questions for staff?
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I also want to say that after watching last week's meeting, I really appreciated the thoughtful deliberations by my fellow members of the governing body. And it's nice to have had that advantage to watch your deliberations, to think about the material for a little bit longer than you guys had the opportunity to, because as Commissioner Ryan pointed out, there's a lot of work that goes into studying how that all works together, especially for those of us who don't have a finance background. I had sent some questions to Ms. Pack through Mr. Scragg earlier today, and I just wanted to confirm that my understanding is actually correct in that 2019 we began with the general fund balance of $7.02 million.
We end.
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, roughly $7 million.
Yes.
If things continue with the latest projections, and I know that's a big if, but our projected balance in the general fund at the end of 2020, beginning 2021, we hope to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.8 million to 8.2 million, depending on how revenues proceed from this point. And I guess that where I look to members of the governing body is that, first of all, I'm really excited that, we haven't had to make a huge withdrawal from the general fund in order to balance our budgets, because I know there are a lot of other municipalities that don't have that luxury. But, and this is where I have to look to Ms. Pack again,
if we were to go ahead and proceed with the budget without raising the mill levy, if my rough math is correct, we would still end up at the end of 2021 with roughly $7.9 to $7.5 million. Am I characterizing that fairly? Because we'd have that net loss of about $270,000.
The mill levy rate raise, the effect on the general fund is approximately $440,000 of revenue that's going into the general fund.
Right.
With that revenue, we anticipated that our net income would be about $500,000.
Right.
I'm just doing this off the top of my head, so I'm rounding. Of that $500,000, we recognized that OCCK was about $340,000 of that, which left us about $160,000
To the good.
to the good.
Right.
We take away that $440,000, we're going to be in the negative approximately $280,000.
Right.
Which would then eat into that fund balance that we were trying to establish.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. And, you know, we've all been on the commission long enough at this point to know that we are trying to raise that general fund balance to $8.5 million in accordance with generally accepted accounting practices for municipalities and what we should have in that reserve. I guess I just wanted to express that I'm not sure that the time is right to continue to try to aggressively meet that goal, because it seems like, you know, we're kind of doing that on the backs of some folks that are experiencing pretty difficult times right now. And I guess the other question that I wanted to ask, or the point I wanted to make, since this is the second reading, is we've heard so much from people about the visible neglect that they see in the parks and other city facilities. And it got me thinking, because for every visible thing, every visible sign of neglect, every weed that doesn't get pulled, every flower bed that doesn't get trimmed or whatever, there are things that people can't see that aren't getting done as well in every department. And I guess where I'm coming from with all of this is that I'd like to reward our workers. I know we're going to be talking about, returning to full-time staffing. I'm anxious to do that as soon as we can. But given the challenges that people are facing, even if it's only $11 a year on a $100,000 house, to me, symbolically, it just doesn't show a great deal of empathy for what people who are facing evictions or higher rents or who've been furloughed are experiencing. So thank you for the opportunity to say that.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
Not so much a question, but and I've thought about everything that you've said, and it's gone through my mind before. But we're worried about the influence that the coronavirus could have on our budget. And I still think not having football is going to be a bigger negative than what people think. But imagine we were a city in Iowa. Coronavirus is no longer their biggest threat to their budget or their general fund. You know, if the generator here is not working, if the electrical system gets wiped out, you know, Mother Nature is always 3 hours away from putting a big dent in our general fund. And I just think, you know, with all the uncertainty and with returning staffing levels up and getting those needed services, I mean, the services aren't free. And you know, I would feel more comfortable having, I won't say necessarily a little more, well, it is a little more cash in the bank, just in case. I just think it's a risky time to cut it too close.
Just following up on something that Commissioner France had mentioned for a couple weeks, have we gotten any information back from Charles Worth, our insurance consultant, in terms of whether or not it would be advisable to keep that $3 million balance in our health savings, what amounts to our health insurance account, or if the target balance of $2 million is adequate.
Staff has met, we've gone over it in great detail and provided notes and kind of an outline of what we'd like to discuss with Charlesworth. And I know, actually it's scheduled for later this week. We reached out to him when the conversation first came up, and our first opportunity is yet this week. So what we tried to do is identify kind of the historical analysis and what type of analysis we might do so we could more strategically make decisions on an ongoing basis about that balance amount, but we don't have an answer yet.
And I think that, that's one of the pieces that I think that would help me at this point. And, at any rate, thank you.
Do we have any comments from the public about the 2021 budget?
Hi, I'm Jane Anderson. I live at 636 East Iron Avenue. I'd just like to say the Friends of the River Foundation board members would like to say thank you for your willingness to support the Smoke Hill River restoration that allows this project to move forward. So much planning and work has gone into this river renewal by the city of Salina, HDR, community members, and the Corps of Engineers. And we were delighted to see construction on the Riverway becoming a reality in the near future. We know this project will enhance the downtown redevelopment as the river renewal creates a new environment for future improvements. Not least will be a brand new place to hike, bike, boat, or just sit and enjoy the beautiful waterway. The restored Riverway will also expand efficiencies in water, stormwater, and flood control, as well as strengthen workforce recruitment. Finally, the Smoke Hill River Renewal will be a project that creates pride of place. This river is a waterway to be shared by all. It will be a place for children to engage in nature. It will be a place for families to unwind and have a picnic. It will be a place for a young canoeer to hone his skills. It will be a place for fishermen to enjoy the bounty of the waterway, and a place for someone to sit and contemplate as they watch the river flow by. Your belief, vision, and funding is allowing the Smoke Hill River to be reborn for you, your neighbors, our visitors, and for your children and grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, I'd bring it back to commission, and we had a couple that have made comments. Do I have any other commissioners that would like to weigh in before we move on?
Ready to act.
Okay, with that, I would accept a motion.
Mayor, I move we approve on second reading ordinance number 2011035, adopting and appropriating the 2021 annual budget in order to meet the statutory certification deadline of August 25th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 2011035, adopting appropriating the 2021 annual budget. We will have a roll call.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Franz?
Nay.
Commissioner Hodges?
Nay.
Commissioner Ryan?
Yes.
And Mayor Hoppick.
Aye. That passes 3-2. Okay, with that, we will move into Resolution 20-7852. Do we have any questions for staff on that, on the salary schedule? Okay, any comments from the public? Okay, if not, I'll bring that back to the commission.
Mr. Mayor, move approval of resolution number 20-7852.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7852, adopting the position classification and salary schedule for city employees for 2021. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. That moves us to the 2021 comprehensive fee schedule. Do any commissioners have questions for staff on that? Are there any comments from the public? Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Mayor Hoppick, I move that we approve Resolution 20-7853, adopting the 2021 comprehensive fee schedule for the city of Salina.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 20-7853, adopting the 2021 comprehensive fee schedule for the city of Salina, Kansas. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you. That will move us into 7.4.
Item 7.4, resolution number 20-7862, authorizing the mayor to execute an amended and restated sidewalk cafe license agreement with JKSK Corporation, authorizing an outdoor sidewalk dining area in Strand Plaza abutting the Barolo Grill Restaurant at 112 South Santa Fe Avenue.
I'll be providing the report today, Mayor and Commissioners. As you recall, last week we discussed an amendment to the license agreement with respect to removal of a tree behind Barolo Grill. I'd be happy to answer any questions in detail that you might have, but suffice it to say that the species of tree is not very conducive with what it drops in the courtyard, and it's outgrown the planter, and it's kind of dominating the space. And so we had a request about removing the tree and as part of the license agreement, and replacing landscaping and installing a private base for a private sculpture in its place. And the discussion spawned some conversation about the current condition of that planter and the possibility that removing the tree and then grinding the stump may actually damage the planter beyond repair, and how would we like to proceed in that instance. So you postponed consideration of the item to give staff the opportunity to make some revisions to the license agreement, and they're provided to you. They're highlighted in yellow. I would say that the bulk of those are highlighted because they're a cross-reference to a new subsection that's been added. So if I could call your attention to subsection 8, it provides that notwithstanding any of the other provisions in the agreement, if removal of the tree causes damage to the planter and the discretion of the city manager, and it makes repair or restoration unreasonable or impractical, the licensee shall be permitted to remove the concrete planter in its entirety, repair and restore the plaza, and install in the place of the original planter a sculpture base meeting the design and safety standards identified by the city manager and Salina Sculpture Tour. And it goes on to provide that if the city manager authorizes removal and replacement, and the work to be performed by the licensee shall be subject to the review and approval of the Public Works Department, and any sculpture base and sculpture installed by the licensee shall be maintained in the same manner as provided elsewhere in the agreement. And if this agreement is terminated for any reason, the sculpture base and sculpture installed by the licensee shall be removed in the same manner as other fixtures are required to be removed by city code. So it essentially makes provision for the possibility that the planter may not withstand the work that needs to be done. If it does, rather than a base in the planter, a base would be installed in the patio or on the surface. It would be a private responsibility to install and maintain, and if the licensee agreement is ever terminated, then it's to be removed and returned to, I want to say its original condition, but returned to surface condition similar to the rest of the plaza area. So essentially from last week, that was the change that was made in response to that particular concern. Other than that, I think you had general consensus that you were receptive to proceeding forward. You just tasked staff with making that revision. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I know a representative of the licensee is here as well and could possibly answer questions.
Questions for staff?
Would this sculpture be part of the normal rotation of sculptures on the sculpture tour, or would it be owned by the licensee?
The intention would be that it would be owned by the licensee, and so they would have in fact, part of the implementation timeline was to leave a little bit of time for the sculpture tour to take place and give them an opportunity to possibly purchase one. So they would be providing the sculpture.
All right.
Which answers my first question. Was it talks about installation of the base, and I was going to ask if there was going to be a sculpture on the base as a part of the deal.
And as I said, a representative of the applicants here, they may be able to speak to it in
okay. Well, no, that's fine. I think if that's the intent, then fine. So if the license is terminated, if the business goes out of business, moves on, whatever, or chooses not to use the patio anymore, then the requirement is that the sculpture base, as I read the blue sheet, that the city has a choice of keeping the sculpture base or of asking that it be returned. And it says original condition, and you've used slightly different terminology. The question is, does that mean that there's a restoration of a planter at that location or just the plaza surface?
I believe it's the plaza surface, and there is, I misspoke, there is, in addition to the possibility of removing the fixture, the city manager on behalf of the city may choose to accept the sculpture base as a permanent fixture. So at the point that in the event that the agreement is terminated, either option exists. It'd be the city essentially that decides its preference, but I think the expectation would be that the surface is restored rather than replacing the planter.
To a plaza, not
Correct.
Not a reinstallation of a planter.
Correct.
Okay.
And that sort of was going to be the second half of my question. If the sculpture base stayed, depending who owned it, we would not then have the option of requesting the sculpture remain, since the sculpture would be the property of the.
Yeah, unless they wanted to be magnanimous, yes, I think this sculpture could go, but we could keep the base, and then we could choose to add it to the circulation, or in the event that we had a subsequent tenant that had some interest, we might be able to work out an arrangement with them.
Okay, and there's a slight difference in wording in the actual agreement from the blue sheet. The blue sheet on the second page, that last paragraph before commission action, it references the planter being damaged because of the planter's poor condition, which would imply if the planter was damaged because of negligence, the different recourse. I'm assuming the way it's written now in the actual that discrepancy is removed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me review the language, but the agreement itself says, if licensee's removal of the tree causes damage to the concrete planter, that in the discretion of the city manager makes repair or restoration of the planter unreasonable or impractical, the licensee shall be permitted to remove the planter in its entirety, repair and restore the plaza, install in the place of the original planter a sculpture base meeting the design standard. So I think if it's damaged by the licensee for whatever reason, then the agreement covers that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very comfortable with that decision resting at your feet.
I guess my question, I'm probably going to turn to Mayor Hoppick since he's our designated sculpture tour person. In the event that the licensee doesn't purchase a sculpture outright and it becomes one of the rotating sites to place a sculpture each year, I mean, is that something that would be acceptable to sculpture tour? And the fact that it's not in as visible a place, being in a restaurant, a plaza that's being used by a restaurant, would that have any concerns for you?
I can address that. We have several sculptures that we currently have, so I do not see this being a rotating site. We have several sculptures that one will be placed on that, like we would on a site out on Santa Fe.
Right.
So yeah, this would be a piece that we already have in our possession.
Okay. And in the future, if that piece rotated out, I mean, it would be a permanent.
It's a permanent piece to stay there as long as both parties, I guess, would want it there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So.
And just practically speaking, if I were the one that had to make the decision of accepting the base, the first thing I'd do is confirm whether it would be put into use by sculpture tour or not. In the event they didn't have interest, then we'd ask the licensee to just restore the surface. And then it was pointed out to me that there's a typo in that last line of section 8. It should say permanent rather than permeate fixture.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Mayor, move acceptance of resolution number 20-7862. Just for the record, with the one correction in the type in the spelling in section 8 from permeate to permanent.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to approve resolution number 20-7862, authorizing the mayor to execute a revised sidewalk cafe license agreement with the one correction. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, that moves us to 7.5.
Item 7.5, return to full staff scheduling transition plan.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. That's me as well. We've had quite a bit of conversation, as you well know, about budget and finances and how to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've also had quite a bit of discussion at the staff level and executive staff level. And I shared with executive staff, if it were up to me to organize the pandemic, I just wouldn't have had it at all. And my point and my sarcasm is it's been very unpredictable, and we've had to adapt quite a bit, and I fully expect we're going to continue to have to adapt. And it is challenging in terms of trying to balance a lot of competing interests and those type of things. And so, we went in, as you know, we went into this in March and early April, trying to make projections and get direction from you as a governing body. You were very clear that you wanted to be fiscally conservative, you wanted to protect reserve balances, and you wanted to plan for the possibility of pretty significant impacts from COVID-19. All of that was very prudent, and that was in advance of the stay-at-home order and knowing what we were in for there and what the financial impacts that might have. And then, as you also know, sales tax is a large part of the general fund budget for sure, and we received those proceeds 2 months in arrears. So after sales activity happened in April, we had to wait till the end of June before we really knew what that looked like. And we had collectively said, not just April, we wanted to see what the recovery in May looked like. And so that then was the end of July before we could see those numbers. So then last week, Ms. Pack provided a financial update on where things stand, and I won't go over that in great detail this week, but suffice it to say that the sales tax activity January, February, March of this year was exceeding 2019. The sales tax activity in April and May and now June is trailing 2019, but it left us at about a break-even point. We had done a number of other things financially in terms of cost cutting and contracts and commodities and capital outlay, as well as staffing, that realized some savings. I think the stimulus package played out much more vibrantly than we might have expected when we first did our projections. And then we've been able to secure CARE funding from the county, and as we mentioned earlier, OCCK funding from the state has covered some of their costs that we would normally cover, which represented a saving. So with all that in mind, and with the financial report that was provided last week, you provided direction to staff that you would like to look at getting back to something along the sense of normalcy, or trying to get staffing back to original levels or normal levels, and you tasked staff with working that through. So we had conversations in the intervening week about the practicality of transitioning back to a full schedule. And as you may recall, the work share plan was communicated in detail to city employees that the financial benefits of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation and that whole math about breaking even and projecting out a break-even date for each individual employee. So that all those assumptions had the vast majority of our employees on work share well beyond July 25th when the program ended, some of them all the way out into November. And so you combine that with another variable that's come into the conversation recently, and that's the hybrid approach to going back to school August 31st of this month. So now we have employees that if they have school-age children in the USD 305 system, I think last week found out I personally know that's when my family found out. I think everyone knows their assignment of whether they're in Group A or Group B now, and so that then tells them whether their students will be in school on Monday and Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday, and then the 3 days of the week that their students will be home. That creates a whole nother staffing question in terms of how individual employees are going to be able to balance that home life added responsibility with work. And so as executive staff talked about it, we have plenty of employees I think are anxious to get back to work, and if we give them a week's notice from today, we can tell them that they're authorized to come back to work at a normal schedule, subject to coordination with their supervisors as early as August 24th. What we're also recommending is trying to accommodate employees that have made daycare arrangements, have made assumptions based on that work share plan that we rolled out, and that are currently trying to sort out what the hybrid school approach might do. And so our proposed approach to that is to extend that on a case-by-case basis in coordination with their supervisors. If individual circumstances necessitate an accommodation, employees could delay coming back to work until Tuesday, September 8th, which would be the day after Labor Day. I would point out that the federal pandemic unemployment compensation ended July 25th, so if they maintain a modified work schedule, they don't have the benefit of the financial payments from federal pandemic unemployment compensation, so they're doing so at some financial cost to them, recognizing that the math we did previously indicated they'd have some financial windfall, for lack of a better word, potentially compared to their normal wages when you factor in working for us on a modified schedule, drawing unemployment with the state, and then drawing federal pandemic unemployment compensation. So as kind of an attempt to anticipate some of the challenges that our employees have and to accommodate those, what we've proposed is, but depending on your decision this evening, notifying employees that in coordination with their supervisors, they can return to work. They're asked to return to work August 24th unless individual circumstances necessitate something else, and that they work that out on a case-by-case basis with their supervisor. I brought up the hybrid model for school, and that really wasn't part of your conversation last week, but it certainly has prompted questions about how we approach that with employees and what their options might be to try to balance those responsibilities. And so I provided for you in the staff report, and we've shared this information with our employees, and we'll be sharing it in greater detail here shortly. But there are a number of forms of leave that are now kind of in play or available based on the Families First Coronavirus Recovery Act and then actions that you've previously taken. So I tried to identify them in what I thought was probably the likely order that an employee might progress through them. Individual circumstances might be different, but as you recall, we provided 80 hours of city COVID leave, which is equivalent to 2 weeks, or for those employees that are working other than a 40-hour schedule, the equivalent amount of leave to accommodate that. We also, by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, are required to provide emergency paid sick leave for 2-week increments. And there were 6 specified reasons for those, and depending on the reason, the amount of leave and compensation varies. But with respect to school and child care, if the child's school or place of care is closed due to COVID-19 related reasons, then that leave pays out at 2/3 the normal rate, up to $200 a day and $2,000 total for that 2-week time frame. Then the Families First Act also provided for family medical leave above and beyond typical family medical leave. It provided 10 weeks of leave for specified reasons that were called out in the Act. Again, one of those being if a child's school or place of care is closed. And again, that was after 2 weeks of other forms of leave are utilized. And it's at the 2/3 rate, $200 a day and $10,000 total. Both of those can be supplemented with other forms of leave. And so HR is going to have a lot of detail to track, but potentially an employee could supplement that because of the 2/3 rate. We also have the city sick leave, and by a resolution that we passed earlier this year, we clarified that COVID-19 and related school closures are eligible uses of that sick leave. We have city vacation leave. By that same resolution you passed earlier this year, We authorized leave advancement up to 120 hours of COVID-19 leave advancement by election of the employee. That truly is an advancement, and there's provisions about drawing that back down as they accrue leave in the future. And then lastly, our personnel policy includes a provision about leave without pay. So now, having said all that, we have employees in many varying circumstances. Quite a few employees that were identified as non-essential were home the entirety of the April stay-at-home order, so that I assume necessitated them using the city COVID leave that was provided and the Families First leave that was provided. Those two combined equated to a month's leave that would have corresponded to the April stay-at-home order. Then we have other employees, whether they're essential employees and were working but had individual COVID-19 related circumstances that might have drawn down on that leave. And then we have employees that were essential employees that didn't have to draw on the leave. They could have been working a normal schedule, and work share in and of itself wouldn't have impacted use of these leave balances. So on an employee-by-employee basis, depending on their circumstances, they'll have varying amounts of leave that might be available for them to balance out the school responsibilities. So we've also previously talked about being flexible in terms of scheduling, and we've talked with department heads that we need to look at each division and function and make sure that we're getting the work done. But if we can find a way to accommodate, if leave's not available and other options aren't available, we can try to entertain trying to balance that as well. So that all kind of comes into play, and while parents may know which group their child is in, parent-teacher conferences are next Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, with school starting on the 31st. So I anticipate that, much like myself and my family, we have employees trying to assess what remote learning is going to look like for their students, and we're going to have to be patient and responsive as they learn more and as they try to put a plan together. I also mentioned in the staff report that there's unintended consequences of returning to work early. We talked about and I hate to call it a windfall, but the fact that it was likely for many employees that the combination of city wages for the time that they worked, combined with unemployment benefits from the Kansas Department of Labor, and combined with the $600 a week that was authorized by the federal stimulus package. And as you well know, that was a one-size-fits-all $600 a week. It was not in any proportion to their wages, in proportion to the time that they didn't work. And so part of our financial strategy, frankly, was to utilize work share to make sure that we weren't putting our employees in a position where they were drawing less pay than they would otherwise, and then to extend work share, or at least to have the opportunity to extend work share out into the future beyond the $600 a week, to maximize our financial savings or our approach while avoiding reductions in force or having to let people go. And so that we went into it with that being the intention. I think we were pretty clear in communicating that we're going to have to continue to monitor and assess and adapt, but the unintended consequence of returning to work early is, at the moment anyway, we are not playing the work share out to a break-even point for not the employees that are on work share. So that extra income that they saw from $600 a week is not offset by decreased income of work sharing beyond the expiration of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation. I don't begrudge any of those employees that, but other employees have expressed that there's an equity issue there, and as much as we tried to come up with an equitable plan and take everyone's concerns into account, we've just got too many variables and too many circumstances to balance all that out entirely. And I would say that I think we were pretty clear that our number one priority was trying to protect each of our employees' base income as we went into the uncertainty of COVID-19. So as executive staff talked about that, and I'm sure you also recall early on here locally and nationally there was talk about hero pay, and we discussed it very briefly and didn't pursue that just as a cost that number one, we didn't know what the future might hold. It was hard to quantify that. possible cost and not something that we could balance out as we were trying to find cost-saving measures. So at this point, the executive staff's conversation was recognizing that it'll never balance things out in their entirety, something in the way of recognition for the essential employees that were not placed, did not observe the stay-at-home order, did not get furloughed, did not get put on work share, but basically continued their normal schedules throughout the last 4.5 months. And we talked about monetary compensation, we talked about leave, and talked about 5 or 10 days of leave, and ultimately what I presented to you is a recommendation for 5 days of leave. It's really intended to be more a showing of appreciation than any balancing of value necessarily. With respect to the fiscal note, we provided this information last week, but if we were to authorize employees to return to work, our cost estimate of savings foregone, I hesitate to call it cost, but the anticipated savings that we attributed to the remainder of that work share schedule, if we continued from this point to our initial anticipated dates for each employee, would have been $600,000 in the general fund, $25,000 in the Arts and Humanities fund, $5,000 in the sanitation fund, $2,000 in solid waste fund, $14,000 in the golf fund, $146,000 in the utilities fund, and $11,000 in the central garage fund, for a total of $803,000. So assuming that we start on the 24th and that we don't find ourselves having to go back into some type of work share scenario, which we would have the ability to do that if the economy turned off to the point that we felt that was necessary. But assuming that we didn't, then there's $803,000 of identified savings that we would be foregoing. With respect to actions for your consideration, the two primary recommendations that I've quantified in the report are authorizing that employees be instructed to return to their normal work schedules beginning Monday, August 24th, and that the city manager or their designee be authorized to allow employees to return no later than Tuesday, September 8th on a case-by-case basis if individual circumstances necessitate an accommodation. And then as a second and standalone item, staff also recommended that 40 hours of additional paid leave be granted to essential employees that work full schedules during the stay-at-home order and were not participants in the work share scheduling. And I guess we should clarify, we're not home during the stay-at-home order, we're not participants in the work sharing schedule, and we're not furloughed. Two other items that occurred to me after the packet had gone out that we talked about last week were longevity pay was another savings consideration that we'd identified, and if the numbers bear themselves out, we're hopeful that we don't have to do away with longevity pay, that we can continue to pay that. And then we also talked about previously about a 10% pay cut for executive staff following the July 25th expiration of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation. So my intention would be, if we're bringing staff back to normal and we're not trying to identify ongoing savings beyond this date at this time, that we wouldn't do the reductions in pay, and we would intend to continue longevity payments unless something changes between now and the end of the year when it's time to consider longevity payments. So with that, be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
During the work share, those that were on the work share, was their health insurance still paid for as normal?
Yes, it was.
Okay, that was a question.
Would an employee, just because of their particular circumstances, be able to delay their return to work after September 8th? And the second part of that, if it's one employee out of, let's say, 30 in the department, if all the other 29 are back, is that work share program with the state defunct, basically?
That is a really good question. We had conversation about that, and we are going to have to look at what we get in the way of response, but we're hopeful that we can continue to characterize some group of employees as work share eligible. But the intention would be that beyond September 8th, they would be expected to return to work or use leave.
And last week, I believe we discussed if the work share for us, we could re-implement that. Of course, we'd have to get it approved by the state, but we have until when that we still qualify for the work share?
It's good for a year, so it extends into April of next year, but there are also some usage limits.
Yeah, Natalie Fisher, HR Director. Yes, that's correct. The maximum number of payments that any individual can receive while on the shared work program was 26, so it would be 26 weekly payments. But our plans are good for 1 year, so at least through April of next year is what we're looking, or early April to mid, depending on when we've added plans.
And I guess employees need to know if we bring them back full-time, that doesn't mean come January 1, things have gotten worse again. There's shutdown that we have to go back to some type of work share or furlough again, so. But I couldn't remember.
We'll definitely need to continue to monitor financial performance in the remainder of 2021, and as we've talked a number of times, I'm mindful of assessing where we're at before January 1 of 2021 so that we have a sense of what that means for our 2021 budget as well. And human nature being what it is, employees understandably, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of variables, and they kind of lock in on what the basics of the communication are. But yes, this would be our intention at this point. We have to continue to monitor financial performance, and we could find ourselves having to go back. And that reminds me too, in terms of equity concerns about, we should extend the work share into November. We also don't know what the federal government's going to do with the next round of stimulus. There's some conversation about additional federal pandemic unemployment compensation at $400 a week, which, if you're concerned about the equity of it all, I can't get it to balance. There's just too many variables.
Well, Ms. Fisher, before you step away, if I could break in just for a moment, do you have any sense of how many employees have utilized like the FFCRA emergency paid sick leave or the emergency family medical leave? I mean, do some employees still have some of that leave time, that emergency leave time remaining that they could access?
Yes, I'll start backwards from the expanded or emergency family medical leave. So far, we have not had anyone tap into the 10 weeks of the paid. It's very confusing because the regulations require that the first 2 weeks are unpaid, but you can balance that with the other pay. So far, we haven't had any of our employees in that scenario where they're using any of that. I anticipate that the school year will bring about some usage and some demand for that. In terms of the emergency paid sick leave and the city COVID leave, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know I'm going to look at the city manager because I sent him some data on that last week.
Looks like we have 77 employees that have used their balance of city COVID leave and 140 employees that have used their balance of emergency paid sick leave. And there's a handful of employees in the 0 to 20 range and the balance range and the 20 to 40 hour balance range. So, that's why I made the point that I did with the April stay-at-home order. That is a full 80 hours for a lot of employees.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. If you have some further.
That's fine. I just.
So let me know whenever I can jump in. I just had a few other. Okay. I'm just a little bit curious as to, the date proposed in the blue sheet is August 24th. And not having children in USD 305, I assume, like you said, Mr. Scragg, you've gotten your notification in the last couple days. I'm just kind of curious as to why we might not sync that up more to the start of school. I'm just trying to figure out how quickly families can scramble around and figure out how they're going to, assume responsibility, or who in their family or in their acquaintances is going to help assume responsibility for the online learning that's going to have to occur. So I guess, my question would be, would it be worth considering resuming a normal schedule like on Tuesday, September 8th, and then and deferring that date just another week or two to require everyone to return. I'm thinking if I'm having a parent-teacher conference on the 28th, school starts the 21st, that's a lot of logistics for working families to try to put into place, especially if they know the clock is already ticking because they should have started back on August 24th. Especially, and I think last week you said something like 115 families were affected with elementary school and middle school students. So, I mean, to me, those are definitely the age of students that are going to require a lot of, supervision and coaching and working with. It's not like a 16-year-old where, they have their assignment and hopefully they can complete some of that independently. So I was just kind of interested to know if it might be a possibility, or what would be the negative of delaying the resumption of the full-time schedule.
Yeah, and the reason we focus on the 115 is the point that you were making, that probably is the ones that are going to be the most intensive in terms of needing time on task. It's less than ideal to have all these dates coming together at the same time, but there was a recognition that the governing body had interest in trying to get our operations back to normal, and that number is a minority of the total employees that we had. So rather than put off the resuming service levels and getting back to normal, that's why we kind of tried to come up with this hybrid, that if individual circumstances necessitate it, you could defer that, but hopefully then, rather than assume every employee needs to have that start date put off, we're trying to kind of customize and resume as much of normal operations as we can.
And I guess maybe I would just ask for maybe a slightly more generous deferral date then. I mean, maybe that looks like September 14th, giving them another week, because like you said, there's no way we're going to make this equitable for everybody. Some employees are going to come out and they're going to have, earned more money because of the unemployment benefits. There's going to be, we can't make this equitable. It's just, so I'm just trying to figure out how we can make it as positive as we can for the working families.
If I could tell you, that probably goes back to what I was asking. How long can you stretch that deferral period before the structure of the work share begins to crumble and it's no longer a valid plan?
It really depends on the response from employees in particular divisions. I mean, Ms. Fisher's aware of, we had 26 different work groups, something like that?
28, 26 that are currently still being submitted each week to the...
And the state would, I'm assuming, probably be all right with the 2-week deferral? I mean, if it, or maybe I shouldn't make that assumption.
Our intention is to adhere to their numeric and percentage requirements, but we're going to have to do our best to work with them on that.
Okay.
Or kind of a follow-up question to that. What degree of flexibility do we have in being able to have some of our employees work remotely? Obviously, employees that don't have, public-facing jobs or don't have specific assignments like public safety or, building-specific assignments. But is that something that we can continue to offer for those employees?
We actually applied for CARE funding for technology to support that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it is so position and division specific. Just depending on the responsibility of the employee, and both in terms of work from home as well as trying to create some flexible schedule, whether that's nights, weekends, what have you. And my sense is, while that may work for some, it's not widespread enough to really solve this problem. So we were trying to be mindful of, rather than just a hard resumption the week before school started, we were trying to accommodate that, but recognizing that, the vast majority of employees probably aren't in this situation, or even if they do have school-age children, they may have alternate arrangements already in place, whether they're an essential employee that had to have this kind of addressed all along. So trying to balance competing interests once again.
Yeah, I can't really sit here and try to. It just makes my head hurt trying to think how we're going to do all this, because I honestly think that at some point during the year, there's a good chance that every student's at home. So as we sit here and we talk about the hybrid, there's a good chance that we're going to have, and being one of the larger employers in the community, we're going to be affected, obviously. And we can't come up with every scenario, because we may have some, you may have some schools that are closed, some aren't, some classes are not being able to be in session because of quarantine, or we may have the whole, district closed. So
I completely agree. Whether it's that widespread or just adaptations to a particular employee's circumstance, that their child's class was impacted, their school was impacted, and as much as employees may look to leadership to solve all this, there's just too many things in play, which is why we inventoried all the available leave and tried to communicate what options they have. If we end up in a scenario where it's complete remote learning, I fully expect we're going to have a conversation and revisit what we are willing to do as an employer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to, we try to get employees back to work. I think we try to be as fair as possible to them, but again, we still have to be ran as a business, and we have to have certain people working also. So it's not ideal for people, but I guess that's why we leave it to staff.
I guess, this is, a lot of work. This is something you would probably only sit down and take the time to do if you considered your employees part of your family. This is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And as far as the going back to school, my youngest is 27, and I'm probably not thinking of things that parents with kids may have to decide in the next 2 weeks. So if there's anyone who planned to come to the podium, if there's something that you think I might not be thinking about, feel free to say it.
I know I've asked this in the past, Mr. Scraggs, so I apologize. Do we have some kind of an employee council that, I think we do have an employee council, but do we ask for their input on things like this? Because like Commissioner Davis said, I am well removed from the USD 305 years.
We do have an employee council, and I am the staff liaison with that. However, with all of the staff restrictions and everything COVID, we've suspended it, so I haven't gathered the group together. I hope to be soon, because we have some additional policy things to discuss that would happen before we bring them to you. These have been a little unprecedented over the last few months.
Look down this direction. Comments, questions?
Well, I was just going to ask, given that we've got a couple meetings off for a Fifth Monday and a Labor Day, should we be reserving a chance to come back here if the things go sideways?
Yeah. Good question. At the moment, I think I'm hopeful that this gets us through initial implementation and the startup of school. I anticipate we're going to have a lot of information gathering to do at the staff level in terms of, and I wasn't entirely joking that individual offices are going to have to get together and say, well, what days did you get? And here's the days I got, and start to try to sort all this out. But I think it's going to take that long for the dust to settle. So if something drastically changed, there might be need to call you back together. But this is intended to make that first step forward in terms of our implementation, accommodate the uncertainty of the school rollout, and then we may have to reassess.
School starts the 7th.
From my perspective.
31st.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, what was the question?
My brain thought the school started the 7th, but it actually starts the 31st.
Of August.
Right, so there's a 1 week period there, okay.
My perception of all of this is that a lot of what we've been talking about, the work share programs, it's in place, it's what we have. We're not going to be able to change very much of that. We're just going to have to rely on the staff to make the best judgments they can going forward with that. You know, my focus has been on how we deal with the equity issue, because that is something we have not dealt with. And I'm just kind of interested in if the staff has given any thought to the mechanics of how that additional leave would work. Is it going to get added to the vacation balance? Can they carry it over at the end of the year? You know, or is it going to be, are they going to be given a certain amount of time to use it or lose it? You know, there's just lots of stuff there that, you know, and I'm not going to ask you to tell us now. You may not have gotten to that level of detail. But my inclination would be that it would be added to the vacation balance. It'd be exempt from the cap, so it's not lost, and that gives the employees maximum flexibility to use it into the future as they wish. I think probably something we don't want to do is have everybody go out the first 2 weeks and use all of their extra leave. That's kind of counterproductive. So I think it should be treated, other than being exempt from the cap, the carryover cap, treated just like regular vacation leave.
We've not finalized all of that, but had very similar conversation. If you put a short duration on it, it's just going to create a mass exodus, and what are essentially the employees we deemed as essential employees. And that reminds me as well, I've forewarned department heads that, you know, this available leave it can be used for childcare issues and school issues. So essential employees that have stuck it out through thick and thin these last 4.5 months can very well have legitimate reasons to now need to use leave. And so departments that have not had scheduling challenges before probably have them coming.
May have them coming. And the last thing I want to say is the leave, as you note in here, is not really a cash expense. It creates scheduling issues. It creates all sorts of issues. And I am much more inclined to be receptive to a 10-day number than a 5-day number. You know, I just think that, you know, that's still is a long ways from making them whole, but it is I think something that's more significant, and I think they'd really appreciate it.
Two things in that regard. Employees can sell back their vacation leave, and so, you know, you have to use half of what you accrue, and that gets to the cap policy that you're talking about before. So it can have an ancillary impact if it's sold back, and then it can also generate overtime. In the event that, you know, using fire as an example, we now have a whole another week of leave to accommodate that just generates more forced callback and overtime. So
I realize that it creates headaches, particularly in those departments that are 24/7, because you can't, you know, you've got minimum staffing. If someone goes on leave, you got to have someone else, and so it does create ancillary issues. And I don't know the answer to balancing all that either.
7.5 days.
Is there a way, and my gosh, Ms. Fisher, we have tasked you with some impossible things in the last few months, but if we were to do the 10 days of leave, is there a way that that could be exempt from the buyout provision? And it would just, and as Commissioner France said, not count against the cap, but is there any way that we could make that?
Could you explain that?
Meaning that if someone retires and they have that 10 days of sick leave, then, or I mean, time off, then we buy that back at a certain rate. And so, I was just thinking about it from that point of view as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, we would need to separate it as a form of a leave, though, to be able to
Right.
know the usage and, in a sense, very similar to what our personal days are now, which is one floating holiday that's given, but it's a use-or-lose type leave, and there's a period of time that we could assign that someone would have the ability to use it.
I guess that was to follow up on that question. Do we legally have the ability to just set these days out there in its own little bucket and put certain requirements on it? Like you said, it can't be bought back if if you leave. It can be used over the next year and a half. I mean, you can put those kind of requirements on certain days.
I believe so. I'll look to our legal counsel, but I
'Cause I'm-
believe as long as we
I'm my HR department, and I'm long ways from being an HR expert, I guarantee you.
My understanding, as long as we communicate, here are all the rules associated with it, that we would have the ability to provide.
I guess that would be mine. It sounds like what we're trying to do is be equitable to these people. We put these days out there kind of in their own little bucket to be used, and I guess they tell us when. And I don't know if they have to be used first before they use their regular vacation. That's the other thing.
Yeah, that's the point that I was going to make.
That's the other thing to come out with. I don't know.
I certainly don't want to be perceived as being opposed to it, because the essential employees have come through. But what would end up happening is, that those employees would be motivated to use this bank of leave first, which then either would create challenges for them to use their other leave subject to the cap that's in place, or they would carry over that leave to be bought back or to be bought out when they leave employment. So while we could put some restrictions on this particular leave, there's going to be an interrelationship there that'll
I'll leave that to you, but I
some.
just was asking.
I think one of the issues of exempting it from the buyback provision is that I think makes worse many of the scheduling issues and so on that come back, because then I have to use it, and I have to use it first.
Right.
And then what if that kicks their regular vacation leave into too much time to where they lose a balance at year end? It's amazing how many things touch. By the way, I do feel sorry for the HR department.
You have our pity.
This is not. If I might make a suggestion on a leave issue, why don't we charge staff with going to the drawing board and bringing back a specific proposal on how that would work, and then maybe we can have a little bit more directed conversation about it, because we could talk about this all night at this point with all of the loose ends, and I would be. I guess it's not time for a motion yet, is it? But I'd make a motion that that's what we do, that we charge staff with going back and, otherwise proceeding as normal, but on the leave question, let's have them come back with a specific proposal so we can have a little bit more focused discussion.
So is your motion to approve the recommendation by staff?
Is there public comment?
Or I guess we could, yeah. Is there? I guess before we have.
I think it is with respect to returning to full staffing levels, and I'm saying the leave question is kind of a side issue, and I would like to see a more detailed proposal on exactly how that's going to work, how it's going to. We're going to have to amend our personnel policy anyway to do this, I presume.
Definitely.
Hold that thought. Let's see if there is any comment from the public. Looks like we might have one.
Ken Ritz from 1314 Parkwood, the master of simple thoughts. You talked about 5 days of leave versus 10 days and no cash. Why not 5 days of leave and throw some cash in? Maybe when you're using your leave, you'd like a little money to be able to spend when you're on leave. I don't know. But that would seem to, if you're getting clash with use it or lose it because you extended, well, then pull back the days, and money's always good. So it doesn't conflict with too many other things. Anyway.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
and to Mr. Ritz's point, that was part of the conversation as well. In these times we've found ourselves here trying to save funds, and then additionally, we're receiving compensation through care funding based on the leave that we granted employees, and so I was a little reluctant to receive that funding and then turn around and have it go back out in place of leave. So,
I guess one last question, and I don't know if we've got any parents of young kids here, but would there be any advantage to young families to delaying the resumption of full-time work to the 31st of the month and then the deferral to the 14th of September? I mean, I don't know. I guess you may be our designated parent.
Well,
Just trying to sync it up with a little bit more with the school calendar, since somewhere between a third and a fourth of our employees will be affected with that.
if the concern is accommodating parents, my suggestion, and in light of all the feedback we've had about service levels and mowing and a sense of urgency there, if you as a governing body are inclined to try to do anything, my suggestion would be keep the August 24th date and just extend that other date.
Okay.
That way, employees that are ready to
go
come
can
back to work can come back to work.
Okay.
It's just a function of those that have school issues.
Well, and I'll just look at the other members of the governing body. I'd like to see that deferred for another week till Monday, September 14th.
You're talking about the second date,
Correct, the
to
second date.
have everybody back by then,
Correct,
Monday, September
14th.
14.
When the time's right, legal counsel Bankston has a point as it relates to the leave and how we approach that.
Mr. Bankston?
Thank you. To the larger question, under Kansas law, you can precondition earned benefits to whatever extent you might wish to impose reasonable preconditions. Kansas law abhors what it refers to as a forfeiture. In other words, any attempt after one has earned a benefit to then impose subsequent requirements that would potentially result in a forfeiture of that benefit. So to the original question, I think as long as the benefit is appropriately preconditioned, it can be addressed in whatever form you all ultimately, along with staff's recommendation, think best. If you are inclined to take Commissioner Franz's suggestion and allow for some more staff work before considering how you wish to approach the leave aspect, the reason I was distracting the city manager was that's certainly an appropriate approach. I would think whatever action you take today, you don't want to then have any vestiges of having approved that additional leave benefit until you get to the point where you're addressing those details such that it's clear that it is subject to whatever conditions precedent or whatever limitations you wish to impose at the time you actually consider implementation.
So if I'm going to need to communicate with staff, my intention would have been to indicate you're receptive to the concept and you've asked us to come back with details for your consideration and adoption. With respect to the motion, I think what Mr. Bankston's requesting is that we're clear that we are only talking in concept and you're asking for staff to bring you back details for action at a future date.
Would the motion, if you look, we have two paragraphs there
Yeah,
on the motion. To me, the second
can I
paragraph.
restate the motion, and I'll make one motion for the first paragraph, and then we can follow with one
Okay.
for the second.
That makes sense.
That
That's
makes
where I
sense
was
to
headed,
everybody.
yes.
Okay, I would move that we authorize the city manager to begin the return of employees who have been on work share to return to their normal work schedules beginning on Monday, August 24th, and that the city manager be authorized to allow employees to return no later than Monday, September 14th, in recognition of the effect that school schedules may have on a number of employees.
Second.
Just to be clear, we may have employees that have other circumstances other than school that request to be able to return on the 14th.
Yeah, I think the wording in that paragraph as it is now
Would suffice, yeah.
Case by case
Case by
basis.
case, yeah. We have a motion and a second to allow the city manager to bring back employees off the work share starting Monday, August 24th, and to be authorize them to return no later than Monday, September 14th on a case-by-case basis. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0.
Just
Okay, I
one
would
point of clarification. If they don't come back by the 14th, all that means is they have to use some form of leave to continue to stay out. It almost sounds as though if you don't come back by the 14th, you don't have a job, but that's not the case.
No, at that point, we'll be going into greater detail about what's the reason for you not being here and which form of leave are you utilizing, and so hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Okay,
Mr. Frames?
I will then make a motion that we direct staff to prepare a detailed plan regarding extending additional paid leave to the essential employees that worked full schedules during the stay-at-home order and that were not participants in the work share scheduling.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to ask staff to prepare a detailed plan on 40 hours of additional paid leave. Granted,
I did not say 40 hours.
you didn't, but it says that. Should we?
I know, and I'm saying I'm not
You
going
don't?
to.
Okay.
I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't want to make that kind of.
Okay.
In
Staff?
keeping with the city attorney's recommendation, I don't think we want to make that kind of qualification.
Okay. Staff is being asked to prepare a detailed plan of additional paid leave for essential employees that worked full schedules during the stay-at-home order and were not participants in the work share scheduling.
Might I add, for further consideration by the city commission.
Further consideration by city commission. Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that also passes 5-0. Now that we do not meet again until September 14th.
What about the 24th? We don't meet next Monday?
Yeah, we meet next Monday.
Yeah.
Oh, we do meet next Monday. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I knew we
I
were
was having to
missing
double
two.
check my
That's right.
calendar.
Dang it. Okay. That's right. We have next, and we missed two. Okay.
Yeah, we the 31st will be
And
the 5th Monday, and then the 7th will be Labor
7th
Day.
is Labor. Okay.
So if I could, I just want to acknowledge that, as challenging as this has been, I personally have been counting my blessings in terms of what this community's gone through and what our staff have done. And as much as individual circumstances have been challenging, I couldn't ask for more from department heads all the way through staff. It's been hard for everyone, but everyone's pulled together.
Wonderful job. If I could ask just one question. Most of the, I hate to use the word complaints, but that's what they are, have been about the upkeep of our green spaces in the city. Just so that everyone is clear, this does not include bringing back any temporary workers.
That's correct.
To catch us up on that work.
Correct. It will create more,
bodies,
work hours, but it will not get us back to what would be a full staffing in a normal season. The other thing that the Parks Director pointed out to me is we're working our equipment harder in terms of mowing thicker grass, and we're having more breakdowns. So in terms of mowers and weed eaters, we're challenged there as well. But it should get us more people and more labor, and we'll be committed. And that is, we've had other points of feedback, but that's been the biggest one by far.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one item under other business. Does anybody else have anything?
I have just a couple quick things. I had a question, and I don't know who to look at, but I've gotten a lot of emails and messages about businesses that are non-compliant with the mask order, and I wondered what's the most effective way for them to communicate that? Is that through the Gmail address that's listed on the mask FAQ page, or what's the most effective way for?
It's the face masks at salina.org.
Okay.
Those come directly to me, and we get complaints, and we've been reaching out to businesses and contacting them, and that. So yeah, face masks at salina.org.
Face masks at salina.org. Okay, and then just following up on that, do we issue any citations, or do we just is ours primarily an educating and encouragement?
So far, it's been education and encouragement. If we have any business that's flagrantly disregarding, then it might rise to the level of citation, but I don't think that's occurred yet.
Okay, great. Well, that's really good to hear. So thank you for that. And then I just wanted to follow up on an email that I had sent you a few weeks ago, just with some further questions regarding the Law Enforcement Advisory Board minutes, some questions about the average length of experience on patrol, officers that we have, and I'd gotten an inquiry, and I can't remember if it was an email that went to all of us, but once we have our study session on the 21st, I can't talk in this mask, it's a terrible. Good thing is no air is getting out, but the bad thing, no air is getting in either. When we have the study session on the 21st to kind of talk about some of the proposals that the Sunflower Coalition had presented, are we planning to have another community forum after that point at an after-hours location like we did before to allow more people to be able to participate?
Yeah, my intention was to put that question to you as part of that
Okay.
study session conversation. We had previously, indicated that we intended to do that. I think the CRB conversation may, form your opinion on that. With respect to your email, I have some of that information.
Yeah.
Don't have all of it. In all honesty, I told Chief Nelson to expect it. I was going to forward it to him, and I haven't got it forwarded to him, so
Gotcha.
it's on me.
Great, thank you.
Okay, my only question is, as we were sitting here today, the 345 Citizens Forum, now that we don't, even if we have study session, we used to do that one because of individuals that didn't want to be on camera. Now that we're doing, we're taping both study sessions and commission meetings. I'd like to see us remove that. It seems redundant to do it at 3:45 and then do it again at 4:05. What does it take to?
My quick review of your rules of procedure is not the right name for the document, but your document on that, it just speaks to the contents of your
Commission
regular
meeting,
agenda.
doesn't it? Yeah.
I think that 345 is, and I know I hate this phrase as much as anybody else, but we've always done it that way. And I think it was in part the study session and not being recorded and aired on cable access, but now it is in either instance.
Do I have any commissioners that would have a problem with us removing the 345 Citizens Forum?
Well, I've always looked at that as an opportunity for citizens just to come ask a casual question, get a casual answer. I mean, if it's not done formally, either just have us available to talk to people, just standing right down here. I mean, it's that one chance where you're not being recorded, you're not on camera. A lot of people will come to that because they're.
No, we're recording those
We're
now.
recording
See, we're
it now.
recording those now. Yeah, study
what I
sessions are
wasn't
recorded, yeah.
sure about. Well, if it's going to be recorded anyway, I agree. You don't need to have both.
You know,
If the intent's to have a place where somebody could just come ask a commissioner or a group of commissioners a question.
well, the problem comes in when you say group of commissioners, because then it's a meeting, and I think we've taken a position that we want the meetings recorded. That's why we started moving towards recording the study session, if I recall correctly. If you want just to informally meet with citizens as individuals, or I guess up to 2 of us could do it, we can do that anytime.
And it
But
also,
once we put it out on a schedule and say we're going to be here at 3:45, it's a meeting.
and when we get back into the study session format and kind of get things back to normal, it interjects at 3:45 in the middle of the study session conversation, and then a lot of times you're trying to do
back to
that,
the-
meet that obligation, and then get back to the conversation and get it wrapped up.
But you know, if they're both recorded, I agree with Mayor Hoppick. It seems kind of redundant to have one at 3:45 and another one at 4:05. And I do know that, you know, the argument used to be that it wasn't recorded and people felt more comfortable with it not appearing on camera to make their statement, you know. But to do that, we'd say we're not going to record study sessions.
And yeah, I agree with all the comments. To me, it seems redundant. The only aspect that I would just like us to consider is in the future, if we do eliminate that, which I'm fine with, when we do have a study session, that we give some consideration that people have questions about that. And a lot of times that's when we get most of our information, is at study sessions. So if there are members of the public that would like to speak to that particular issue or have questions about the topic under discussion, I just don't want to eliminate that entirely, but I don't think that it needs to be just its own standalone
I agree. I think
study
that's a
session.
whole, we could open it, but
forum.
we always had to open it up to citizens forum for anybody to talk about what we weren't having
Right.
study session on,
So to make this happen, do we need it to be a formal action item on an agenda, like next week?
I'll double check, but the rules of procedure seem to be directed at your regular meeting, not, it does not.
Okay, so
address
the
the
question.
We just wouldn't publish it.
The question for my fellow commissioners would be, do you think it best that we do this in a way that we're giving notice that we're planning on doing it and taking action?
fine.
Yeah.
Or do it now and by acclamation or whatever? My inclination is to lean towards the former and say, you know, let's make sure we it's not a formal change to the written procedure, but it is certainly a change in the way we do business.
Right.
That'd be fine.
That's fair.
Yeah, we can prepare it as an action item if you like.
Yep, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
One paragraph, blue sheet. Okay.
Yeah, one
I'll have somebody
paragraph,
look
blue
at
sheet,
it.
please.
Yes.
And the intent is that there would be time for citizens' comments or questions during the study session, or
On that topic.
On that
topic,
topic, sure.
Yes,
Yeah. No,
yes.
this is not an intent to not let people participate in that.
Study.
It's just that we kind of duplicate sometimes. And I noticed tonight, one person was a little bit confused as to
Yeah.
whether they needed to comment at 3:45 or at 4 o'clock, and they elected to comment at 4 o'clock. So, anyway.
Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
second.
Got a motion, second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We will see you next week. Let's try to give it to y'all.
All right.
Got my hopes up. I was
Yeah,
like,
I was
holy
gonna
crap,
say,
I've missed a
what?
week.
I didn't make